Hello once again, friends, neighbors, and fellow Christians, and welcome back to our ministry here at What the Bible Says. Thank you so much for your time that you invest with us in watching our videos, and we hope that we're doing you some good in encouraging you to study the Bible, but to study it in its context. And again, especially, we want to thank you for joining us in this another video where we are continuing in this series where we are debunking the typical objections that are raised by the futurists against all things fulfilled. And we are demonstrating that every objection that is raised without fail, every objection that is raised, when we examine the context, then it turns out that their objection actually refutes the futurist paradigm. And it supports all things fulfilled 100%. And so if you watched the previous video, then you are aware that we have begun a series of videos, a section in this series, where we are looking at the questions that were posed by Brother Coogan Collins in the somewhere around 15 to 16,000 words of text that he dropped in response to a few of my comments. And so sifting through all of those, I assembled this list. And again, many of those are redundant. And when we answer one, that will take care of at least a part of another some of the questions. And so I want to start off by saying that, Brother Collins, when I surf through your material, I see an ocean of self-contradictions, illogic, inconsistencies, straw man distractions, textual reconstructions, and egregious disregard for the context, redefinition and the alteration of biblical terms, verses, and sometimes a phrase or a verse ripped out of both the context, the immediate context as well as the remote, and then of course the occasional implementation of the maybe and the not necessarily hermeneutics. But even at looking at all these things, what is most obvious is that the entire foundation of your paradigm relies on your redefinition of the eschatological time statements, like the term fulfilled and the about to, at hand, soon, shortly, near, etc. Those kind of time statements. So, folks, if Brother Collins allows these phrases, well, like these things must shortly take place because the time is at hand, Revelation 1 through 3, and if he allows those to mean exactly what they say, you know, exactly what the text says, then he gives up the entire book of Revelation. And if he allows the statements of Jesus, where he said, verily I say unto you, this generation will not pass till all these things be fulfilled. And then when he said in Luke's version that these be the days of vengeance, that all things which have been written are to be fulfilled, and that's Matthew 24:34 and Luke 21:22. And if he allows those statements to mean exactly what the text says, then he gives up the Olivet Discourse. And then again, realizing that Revelation is John's expanded version of the Olivet Discourse. And for Brother Collins to surrender these texts to the fulfilled paradigm, well, that's just fatal to his futurist doctrine. And while Brother Collins promises me that he will address and refute the claims presented in my response, focusing on whichever passage, you know, is at hand, and the related passages, while exposing inconsistencies with my argument and providing clear scriptural evidence, well, then he says, you know, each point will be examined in light of what the text actually says, and logical fallacies will be avoided. And while he makes this grandiose, professionally sounding statement here, declaration, like I said, as I surf through his material, I find that he does none of the above. And again, this is some smooth, professionally sounding lingo which attempts to cloak the fact that he is doing the exact opposite. And Brother Collins is the epitome of Jesus' statement in Matthew 7, "Judge not, that you be not judged." And you see, Brother Collins, here is the difference in our hermeneutics. It is your practice that every eschatological passage that you approach, that it must be run through the, in other words, ringer of your mind and your presuppositional paradigm, and you rip phrases and verses out of their context and redefine and reconstruct those phrases and verses and words based on your misunderstanding of another text which you have done the same thing to. So in other words, your understanding on one passage or phrase or word must be forged into something other than what the text actually says because of your misunderstanding on another passage that you have twisted and reshaped. In other words, you are citing yourself as your own authority. Now, on the other hand, I look at the same word, phrase, verse or text, and I first consider what it actually says. And then I look at the context. I also look at the original language to see what the definition of the word is, or if it's maybe a phrase that's translated from a word, and what the tense is, if it's a verb, what tense is being used by the New Testament writer, and then I compare how that same term in the same sense is used in other texts. In other words, I allow Scripture to interpret Scripture. Now, let's look at an example. Now you say, and I'm going to quote you, Brother Collins, you say the term tarry, chronizu, we'll take a stab at pronouncing the word. The term tarry in Hebrews 10:37 does not negate potential delay, but reassures that when the event comes, it will occur without further postponement. This concept matches entakei, quickly, in Revelation 22:7, which highlights suddenness rather than immediacy. Well, right here, you have taken entakei, quickly, out of its context, both of the book and the verse itself, as well as the immediate grammatical construct. And you have defined it to suit your presuppositions. And here you demonstrate that you are ignoring the clear scriptural evidence, because in order for entakei to mean what you suggest, then the grammatical construct of Revelation 22 verse 7 would have to be, "Behold, I shall come quickly." But that is not what the text actually says. The text says, "Behold, I am coming quickly." You see the difference? I am coming is the present indicative tense. And folks, Brother Collins changes the present indicative erikomai, rendered am coming, to the future tense elusomia, as rendered shall come, like in Philippians 2 and verse 24, which says, "But I trust in the Lord that I also myself shall come shortly." So even in this instance, the future tense demands that it would occur in Paul's lifetime. At least that was his intention. And so this is not Brother Collins' only mistake here, as he employs the futurist shell game of switching terms. Yes, Brother Collins cites the term entakei when the term used in Revelation 22:7 is taku. Now, while the terms are of the same word family, Brother Collins should not make such a blunder while telling you, the reading audience, that he is going to expose my inconsistencies with the clear scriptural evidence in light of what the text actually says, as he cites the wrong term and then changes the tense of the verb. Now, folks, you need to let that permeate and percolate in the forefront of your mind as you consider anything that Brother Collins says regarding eschatology. Now, Brother Collins suggests that the term teri, chronizu, in Hebrews 10:37 does not negate potential delay, but reassures that when the event comes, it will occur without further postponement. Well, what a convoluted and redundant gaggle of hogwash. When the event has come, who in the world would think that it is being further delayed? I mean, anyone with just one brain cell still up and running at 50% would know that when the event has come, that it's no longer being delayed. Brother Collins' redefinition of this term charges Paul with tautology. The term chronizu is defined by Mounce as to spend time, to linger, delay, be long. So, along with redefining the imminence of the very, very little while of this verse to correspond with his presupposition of certainty, Brother Collins completely reverses Paul's will not spend time, will not linger, will not delay, or will not be long into will certainly spend time, will certainly linger, will certainly delay, will certainly be long, and will certainly spend time, and brother, a whole lot of it. And this is a complete shuck and jive redefinition of what the text actually says. The term teri, chronizo, in Hebrews 10 verse 37 is only found 5 times in the New Testament, and this is the only instance where it is used in the future tense. This is used, for instance, in Matthew 25 and verse 5 in the wedding parable. This is where Jesus said, "Now, while the bridegroom was delaying," they all got drowsy and began to sleep. And so what the bridegroom is doing here in this text is what Paul said Jesus would no longer be doing in a very, very little while. And you see, folks, Brother Collins once again rips a term out of its immediate context. Paul said, "For yet a very, very little while, he who is coming will come and will not tarry." So just as Brother Collins changed, "Behold, I am coming," irakomahi, into shall come of Revelation 22 verse 7, Brother Collins ignores the immediate text in the same sentence of Hebrews 10:37, which actually says, "He who is coming will come and will no longer delay." Same Greek term in the same Greek tense, folks. Brother Collins reconstructs Paul's statement of "he who is coming will come and will no longer delay" into "he who shall come, but will certainly delay for a very, very long time. But when he finally gets around to it, he'll come like a speeding bullet." Now that's what Brother Collins wants you to believe Paul's intention was in this verse. Now again, not trying to sound rude, but this is Brother Collins's opinions, which he reads into these texts. All right, now the second question in the list of 25 questions that I put together out of Brother Collins's material is, if Matthew 24:27 only referred to Jerusalem, why does Jesus use imagery that emphasizes universal recognition and visibility? Well, the short answer is, Brother Collins, He doesn't. And you see, folks, I asked Brother Collins for an example. Now you got to get the background of this. He has made this argument, and I made the original argument that when Jesus used the lightning analogy in Matthew 24:27, that he used the exact same analogy in Luke 17, about verse 25, I believe it is. And there in Luke 17, it is in direct response and answer to when the kingdom would come. All right? And so Brother Collins is trying to work around that argument. And he said that the lightning represented a universal idea, and I'll quote him here in just a minute. But I asked him, show me an example in nature where a streak of lightning circles the globe. Okay? Now here's his response. While lightning may not circle the globe in nature, the global scope of Christ's return is consistently taught in passages such as Revelation 1. Here's exactly what I said he does. He bases his conclusion on this passage based on his erroneous understanding of that passage. He's not dealing with what this text actually says. You see that? All right, let me do this again. While lightning may not circle the globe in nature, the global scope of Christ's return is consistently taught in passages such as Revelation 1:7, where every eye will see him, and Acts 1:11, the ascension scene, Acts 1:11, where the angels declare that Christ will return visibly. They don't. We'll cover that later. Where the angels declare that Christ will return visibly and universally. Now notice this, folks. You got to catch this. This universal visibility is the key takeaway, not a literal circling. Did you catch that? So what Brother Collins is actually saying is he knows that his application does not fit the analogy. But he's going to use it that way anyway, as he disregards the context. Brother Collins, you say this is not a literal circling. So you're using a metaphor that you admit is not to be taken literally and making a literal application out of it. And that, folks, is the futurist paradigm in a nutshell. That is the bombshell admission right there. Brother Collins just admitted it. This is an epic example of foot-in-mouth syndrome. Thank you, Brother Collins, for saying the quiet part out loud. Futurists take Hebrew parabolic language that was never intended to be interpreted literally, and they interpret it literally. And Brother Collins has just admitted it, as he boasts that he's going to expose my inconsistencies with clear scriptural evidence and what the texts actually say. You see, Jesus never created parables using things of nature which never happened. You take the parable of the sower. You know, the sower goes out and sows seed, falls in different types of soil. Did Jesus, does anyone ever take Jesus' analogy of the seed that fell on the rocky ground, and and it springs up, and when the sun's up it withers away? Does anybody ever make that into an analogy that, well, that grows up into a full mature head of plant where you receive 100-fold of harvest? No. Why? Because that doesn't happen in nature. You see, Jesus uses things that happen in nature to teach something. And Brother Collins has just admitted that he takes a metaphor that is not intended to be interpreted literally, and he's interpreting it literally. There is no Old Testament apocalyptic text where lightning was used to denote a visible, bodily, or universal appearance of God. Now, when Jesus arose from the dead, Matthew 28 and verse 3 tells us that his countenance was like lightning. and his clothing was white as snow. So, what image do these words create in your mind, folks? Brightness, right? All right. Let's look at a text here that you find in Psalms chapter 18. And this is where David was in great despair because his enemy was trying to kill him. And he prayed to God for deliverance. And he says, "In my distress I called upon the Lord and cried unto my God, and he heard my voice out of his temple, and my cry came before him even into his ears." Now notice this language. "Then the earth shook and trembled. The foundations of the hills moved and were shaken because he was wroth. There went up a smoke out of his nostrils, and fire out of his mouth devoured. Coals were kindled by it. He bowed the heavens and came down." God came down. Do you see that? "He came down, and darkness was under his feet. And he rode upon a cherub, and did fly. Yea, he did fly upon the wings of the wind. He made darkness his secret place. His pavilion round about him were dark waters, and thick clouds and skies. And the brightness that was before him, his thick clouds passed, hailstones and coals of fire. The Lord also thundered in the heavens, and the highest gave his voice, hailstones and coals of fire. Yea, he sent out his arrows, he scattered them, he shot out lightnings, and discomfited," that's King James Version, "he vanquished them. Then the channels of the waters were seen, and the foundations of the world were discovered at thy rebuke, O Lord, and the blast of thy breath, the blast of the breath of thy nostrils. He sent from above and took me and drew me out of many waters. He delivered me from my strong enemy, and from them which hated me, for they were too strong for me." And so in this scene here, we have Jehovah coming down out of heaven with fire out of his mouth and smoke out of his nostrils. But no one saw a literal fire-breathing dragon descending out of the heavens, now did they? And while the text mentions that God gave his voice, so there was the voice of God, but there's no record of any audible divine voice. He bowed the heavens, but the heavens remain unaffected. He rode an angel around on the wind. The earth and the mountains shook so that the hills were moved, but there's no record of any massive earthquake in David's locale, not that I know of anyway. He was accompanied with thunder. He shot out lightning bolts, thick clouds, hailstones, and coals of fire. And yet there's no record of anyone seeing literal hailstones and coals of fire or bolts of physical lightning destroying David's enemy. And I'm pretty sure that Brother Collins wouldn't attempt to interpret these metaphors literally, which begs the question, why does he interpret the same type of metaphors in the New Testament literally? Well, you see, folks, he has to, or admit that he's wrong and give up his doctrine. And he'd sure have to go back and rewrite a huge library of text. So I guess it's just easier to trudge on and hope for the best, I guess. But back to my question. When Jesus arose from the dead, his countenance was like lightning and his clothing was white as snow. Again, what does this language indicate? Brightness. When Jesus was transfigured before them, Matthew 17:2, his face shone like the sun and his clothes became as white as light. Again, what does this language indicate, folks? Brightness, right? And you see the transfiguration was a vision of the parousia. And so that is a huge problem for your doctrine, Brother Collins, because if and since the parousia, now the next time you address this, don't leave out the definite article. The parousia of the Son of Man was only viewable through a vision, then why do you insist that the parousia will be a visible bodily appearance viewable to every eye on the planet. And this is not your only problem. I find it highly curious that in all of your library of text that you are presented, there is not the first stitch about 2 Thessalonians 1 or 2. Why is that, Brother Collins? I don't think that you would deny that the day of the Lord of 2 Thessalonians 1 is the day of the Lord of 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. And you see, these Thessalonians, as early as about AD 50, had come to believe that the day of the Lord, that is that Christ's second coming had already occurred. And you see, this is worthy of our attention. You see, we first note some textual and contextual facts about their belief. In other words, what the text actually says. And it's obvious that they did not share the same eschatological paradigm as you do, Brother Collins. Why? Because they were living, breathing human beings, living on the earth while simultaneously believing that the day of the Lord had already arrived. And this, without question, demonstrates that they could not have believed that the nature of the second coming would be the cataclysmic event envisioned by you and all of our futurist opponents. And so it's obvious that they understood that life on earth would continue after the Lord's return. They surely knew that they were still on earth, just like in Isaiah 65, 20 through 25, that you admit applies to the Christian age. And there's not one word spoken about all the graves being opened. I wonder why that is. But now let's consider how Paul addressed their misunderstanding. And folks, what we need to see is that Paul's response regarding the nature of their misunderstanding is in the timing. In other words, Paul is correcting them on the timing of the second coming, not on the nature of the Lord's return. He says the day of the Lord will not come, that the day of the Lord will not come until two conditions are met. The first condition was the falling away, and that is the great apostasy, which clearly was yet in Paul's future, and especially since it was one of those signs of the second coming given by Jesus in Matthew 24 and verse 12. And again, that's in the section of text that you told Brother Malini was fulfilled in AD 70. And then the second condition was the revelation of the man of sin. Notice here that Paul had to give them visible signs to know when the day of the Lord had arrived. He never suggested that they go check the graveyard to see if it was empty, or say that they saw that when they would see billions of reconstituted corpses ascending up into the sky, well, then they'd know that the day of the Lord has arrived. And he didn't say that when you know that the sun and the moon is no longer in the sky, well, that's how you'll know that the day of the Lord has arrived. He didn't give them a sign that when they would see the whole earth being dissolved with intense heat, that's how they'd know the day of the Lord was no longer delaying, right? Paul said the only way they could know was according to the signs. The two very clear, visible signs, the great apostasy, the great falling away, which incidentally Paul would later write to Timothy and say that all Asia had turned against him. That was underway by that time. And then the revelation of the man of sin. And of course, the most obvious, unequivocal sign was the one Jesus gave, and that is the fall of the temple, recorded there in Matthew 24, 3 through 34, which again, you admit, was fulfilled in AD 70. And this also corresponds with the two signs given by Paul. Now, let's notice some textual facts about how Paul corrected their misunderstanding. The first sign was the great apostasy would occur, And then the second sign was the man of sin, the man of lawlessness, would be revealed. All right, and Paul gave this sign that the man of sin was sitting in the temple of God, presently showing himself to be God. So, Brother Collins, the logical question here for you is, what temple was still standing when Paul wrote 2 Thessalonians that a man could be sitting in and showing himself, presently showing himself to be God? Was it not the temple in Jerusalem? Let's read a few verses here from 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. Verse 3, let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come, except there come a falling away first, and the man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he as God sits in the temple of God, aorist, active, indicative, showing himself, present, active, participle, showing himself that he is God. Verse 6, and now, that's Paul's now, and now you know, present, active, indicative, what is restraining, present, active, participle, that he may be revealed in his own time. The mystery of lawlessness is already at work. Only he who now restrains will do so until he is taken out of the way. And so you see, Paul said that the man of sin sits in the temple of God, showing himself to be God. Was the man of sin in heaven, sitting with Christ? Well, I know, that's a well, duh. No, of course not. But there was a temple where the man of sin was sitting and opposing God. And it was that temple in Jerusalem. And that is the only temple which would have been called the temple of God, apart from the church. And Paul said that the mystery of iniquity was already at work. Paul told the church at Thessalonica to remember that when he was with them, that he had already told them these things. So again, it's unavoidable that these events were to occur in their lifetime. But they shouldn't be misled in believing that the day of the Lord had already arrived, because it was about some 20 years before the temple would fall. And when the temple would fall, which was to be the sign of Christ's return in AD 70, that would also be the destruction of the man of sin. How do I know this is true? Because this is what the text actually says, Brother Collins. Paul said the man of sin would be destroyed by the brightness of Christ's parousia. Did you catch that? The man of sin would be destroyed by the brightness of Christ's parousia. Now, the heartbeat of Paul's first letter to these Thessalonians was regarding the parousia of Christ. In chapter 3, in 1 Thessalonians chapter 3 and verse 13, Paul quotes from Zechariah 14 and verse 5, applying that prophecy's fulfillment during their lifetime. So, Brother Collins, here's another logical question for you. Why would Paul cite from a prophecy specifically about the destruction of Jerusalem in 1 Thessalonians 3:13, and then continue that discussion about the parousia of Christ in the next chapter, and you apply that yet to our future? Why is that, Brother Collins? And then Paul would proceed to write them his second letter, giving them two physical signs to identify when the day of the Lord has come. And the man of sin would be destroyed by the brightness of Christ's parousia. You see, Brother Collins, you can't divorce the parousia of the Lord of 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 from the parousia of Christ in chapter 3 and the parousia of Christ in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. And that there it literally is the parousia his. All right, so again, your question, if Matthew 24:27 only referred to Jerusalem, why does Jesus use imagery that emphasizes universal recognition and visibility? What was to be the visible signs, folks? What was to be visible were the signs of Christ's parousia. The man of sin who sits in the temple, showing himself to be God, preceded by the great apostasy, and then his destruction along with the fall of the temple, being the visible signs of Christ's return. And though the return of the Lord was definitely a visible event, attended with these signs, there is no text which says that Jesus would come out of the clouds in a personal, visible body that every eye on the planet would see. And we'll address, Lord willing, we'll address Acts 1:11 and Revelation 1 verse 7 in upcoming videos to demonstrate what I've just said. And we'll demonstrate that exegetically, contextually, and based on what the text actually says, you know, the clear scriptural evidence. And so I'll close this video with one more logical question, Brother Collins. Why is it that all of the time statements in your paradigm, you know, the soon and shortly and quickly and at hand and near, etc., why is it that all of those time statements in your paradigm used in eschatological texts without fail mean the exact opposite of what the identical time statements mean in non-eschatological texts? Now you think about that, and I want you to answer that question. All right, folks, we're going to end this video right here, and I appreciate your time in studying with us, and I hope that, again, you won't forget to hit that like button, and if you're new to our channel, punch that little subscribe button right there. Click the bell icon. I always say that wrong. Click the bell icon so that you won't miss a notification of when we upload a video. And then please share our videos out to your friends and your neighbors, and help us to get the word out. So let's just study the Bible, but to study it in context. Let's let the Bible define its own terminology. Let's let the Bible interpret itself, comparing spiritual things with spiritual, as Paul said, and not going beyond what is written. Okay, again, thank you so much, folks, for your time. And until our next video, I pray that God will bless you richly in your study of His Word. And folks, you have a blessed day.